Thanks everyone. So, friends, colleagues, distinguished guests, my name is Andrew Carlin, and I have the privilege of welcoming you to this celebration of food innovation as the Director of EIT Food's Regional Co-Location Centre, or CLC, and our region covers the UK, Ireland and Iceland. And welcome to Reading. The EIT Food mission to innovate finds a perfect home here in Reading, which is a town with a deep heritage in food and agriculture, a high-tech present, and a future which is built on emerging digital business. Today, Reading, in the heart of the Thames Valley region, is home to our CLC, and within 15 minutes of this site, you'll find almost half of our regional partnership and the many businesses and networks and jobs that they're involved in and they create. Extended networks of local and international businesses active in food, nutrition, and increasingly in digital health. And from summer 2018, again, only 10 minutes from here, on the other side of the M4, the newly opened Thames Valley Science Park will play home to our EIT Food Accelerator for the region. Now, the Accelerator is an incubator nurturing and developing new and innovative food business and entrepreneurs as EIT Food looks to promote the future of our industries, future talent, technology, future investment, and future growth. And our speakers this afternoon will touch on the role of EIT Food and the ecosystem around us in building that future. Our new EIT Food CEO, Margaret Bath, will describe the challenges that we're ready to embrace. We'll hear from Professor Chris Elliott from Queen's University Belfast on the bigger issues our sector faces around food integrity and consumer trust. And Manuel Molina from EIT in Budapest and Jane Brickman from the UK's Food Knowledge Transfer Network will explore the priorities and ambitions shaping the work of both European and UK innovation agencies as they create opportunities for us to meet those challenges. However, to start with insights into our EIT Food partnership, our progress and our vision, it's my pleasure to introduce Margaret Bath, our new permanent CEO. In the few weeks Margaret has been with us, the energy, drive and vision that Margaret already brings to EIT Food is tangible and visible to us all. And we're all very excited to be working with Margaret and looking towards the future with her. So please welcome Margaret Bath.
Thank you, Andrew. That's very kind of you. Well, today is a watershed moment. This is our inauguration, and it is indeed an exciting time to be here. I'm not going to repeat what I said this morning, but I just want to call out that we are entering into a whole new beginning. So a lot of pre-work has been done, and the clock sort of starts ticking now, right? There's a lot of work ahead of us. And I just thought I would leave you with a little bit of food for thought. One thing I do want to say is we just had that marketplace, and I was sitting over here with my functional directors, and to hear their enthusiasm about potential projects that are coming was music to my ears. So, when they get excited, I get very excited. And I was pleasantly pleased, and you'll understand why in just a minute. So, we look at, these are just a few of the megatrends affecting society, really as it relates to the food and ag space. And we all are very familiar with these, but, the big thing here is the world is undergoing a transformation, and food and ag we've been a little bit slow about transformation across our sector. And let me just give you a little perspective. So you look at the entire value chain across food and ag, and this is an old slide, so I apologize. I pulled this together very quickly. But the world's economy, as it relates, and you look at percent GDP, 30%, over 30% of the GDP of the world is food and ag. So you think about the economic impact and the potential to do great good, and also the potential for creating damage, like more disparage remarks between the haves and the have-nots. The food and ag space actually can be a great equalizer as we help minorities and women. If you look at farming and agriculture in general, there's a huge opportunity to equalize the playing field for all members of society. And we've started, okay? So the food value chain spans a diverse set of players, and we talked a little bit, we had a great question this morning in regards to, the ag space, and that we might be a little bit underrepresented there, and I don't disagree. But we have a very diverse set of, companies, of researchers across the magnitude, the scope of the value chain is amazing. And we have to do a better job. Today, it's fragmented. We have to connect the entire value chain in order to transform it. And I think we're off to a great start. We've got 50 partners, and surely we'll be adding several more as we come up to speed. This slide is sort of a call to action, because this talks about the rate of change. And this is about technology change. And we are seeing seismic shifts. So you think about your phone. So I left my iPhone on the table, but we rarely go anywhere without our integrated device, whether that's a Samsung or an iPhone. The length of time for basically 90% penetration has been quite small. Same thing with the Internet of Things. And so the point I'm making here is we have to move much faster. The rate of change is only going to go up, and demands are only going to go up, and those who can't keep pace will be left behind. And I'll give an example of that. When you think about not learning how to adapt to transformational changes, and I'll use printing photographs. I'll use the Kodak company because it's a classic example. Kodak had all of the IP for basically digital printing and for digital photos that could be passed around. They didn't see the seismic shift coming, and they kept telling the scientists in the lab, the board of directors, hey, that's nice. That's sort of a novel thing. They didn't want to disrupt their profitable business model. And business models have to be disrupted. Because when you don't disrupt, fast forward 20 years after the 1970s when that scientist brought this technology forward, which, by the way, has been licensed by Apple, by Google, by everyone, Kodak went bankrupt. And it's because they didn't respond to the seismic shifts that were happening around them. So we live in a world that's fast-moving and that's very demanding, and the food and ag space has been slow to evolve compared to other sectors. I mean, we just gave the phone example, right? So we have to accelerate what we're doing, and the time is now. And this new model, this EIT food, is a great leap forward, but let's seize the moment and move forward with it. Another case in point here. So we have, within the food and ag sector, we have, it's fairly consolidated. And it used to be a barrier of entry with size, and particularly for new products. It was hard to get your products listed. What has happened now is Amazon has come in, and e-commerce has come in, and you no longer have to go to Carrefour or anywhere else and get your new product listed. You can sell it on the internet. And that's only going to continue to evolve. Because of these highly profitable businesses, we have kept the business models somewhat stagnant. And this is reflected. This is a Boston Consulting Group annual study that they do. There aren't any food companies on this list, per se. So that tells us something about potentially how lagging our sector is to driving transformational change, okay? Now, it is helping us serve the global food crisis. And I'm going to give you a U.S. example, and please pardon me for that. But in the 1960s, a farmer in the U.S. had to feed about 26 people. And there was the Industrial Revolution. Fast forward, a lot of productivity came through biotechnology and then was redeployed through other parts of the globe. By 2050, that same farmer will need to feed 265 people. So the shift in technologies, precision agricultural, using all the technologies that exist out there, there's so much that can be reapplied to the food and ag space that hasn't been done. So there are technologies that we can take and integrate into our long value chain. And this technology needs to conserve precious natural resources because we know that this is finite, right? And, oh, by the way, we need food and products that are sustainable and nutritious. In my mind, and I am so excited to be here, and I hope you can feel my enthusiasm, the path forward is bright. And it's very important to point out on this slide, the sun is rising. The sun is not setting. And we are rising with the sun, and it will be full of positive change, and we're going to make it so. But we can't operate as business as usual. The status quo is not going to deliver transformation through our value chain. So I look forward to walking through this journey with all of you and supporting the partners, because that's where activation starts, is with every single partner in this room. So thank you for the opportunity, and I'm really looking forward to the years to come. Thanks.
Thank you, Margaret. So our next speaker is Manuel Molina. Manuel is a program officer at the European Institute of Innovation and Technology in Budapest, involved in the knowledge and innovation communities of which we are part. Formerly our program manager, now working with EIT Health. Manuel has helped us navigate the occasionally Byzantine world of EU funding. Manuel's support really has been essential to getting us to this point today, where we're an active part of EIT Food's ecosystem. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome Manuel to describe the priorities and work of EIT. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew, again for this kind introduction. And it's really my pleasure to be with all of you this afternoon, representing the EIT, the European Institute of Innovation and Technology. not been alone. It's also my colleague Katarina Bousova in the room, so it has been really a pleasure. Here you are. To share already with you and with the permanent team and the interim team and all of you since we met the first time in Bilbao 1 year ago. But let me also say that this is also emotional from my side to be in this location as it was presented this morning by Sir Bell and Andrew. Just to let you know, just 20 years ago, I was an individual running from the football pitch to the university and to the business in my home country in Spain. So you can imagine that this is quite connected to my heart on how to put all these dynamics on food, nutrition, sport to really high performance. But it's not the business of today, so I will really stick in what I was expecting to deliver. But probably it's good to share that I recognize a lot of these values from my educational times in this community. And this is what I tried also during the first year in the startup phase to connect with all of you in one way or in another. Let's say formally, and on behalf of Martin Kern, the interim director of EIT, but also on behalf of Peter Olesen, the chair of the governing board of the EIT, I'm here to congratulate the EIT food community, to the partners, to the interim team led by Helen, to the permanent team led now by Margaret, but also to the members of the supervisory board chaired by Peter, of the great work that you have done during the last 14 months at least, and the intensity of this journey. But let us also congratulate for the fact that the framework partnership agreement is now signed from your side, and hopefully in the coming days will be signed by our director, and this will pave the way for the next 7 years of relation between the EIT and the EIT Food. And this comes together with the signature of the first specific grant agreement in the coming days as well. This operationally leads to the first business plan that will be the master document for all of us in the coming months. It's not new to say that this will lead the implementation and the maximization of impact of more than 26 million euros of EIT maximum contribution. But if I put also the figures that you are putting together, thanks to the complementary activities, we are talking about more than 127 million euros for this year. So we should all agree that this is moment to congratulate in this inauguration event. But let's say that the Framework Partnership Agreement SGA is just the final outcome of a very intense year, a year full of lessons learned that we from the EIT headquarters, we have been always, and you will probably recognize my words on lessons learned, on transferring what it has been happening in other innovation communities. But it's also time to recognize that the EIT Food has been pioneering and leading to absorb these lessons learned and to try to make the best of them from day one. So thank you very much for this. Please keep these dynamics. My colleague Katerina will lead your portfolio from now on, but I will be just in the corner, and not physically only within the same office of Katerina, but also leading the portfolio of EIT Health. So we should expect a lot of synergies, connection, and complementarities. But it's important that the EIT Food kick legal entity is already there for a while, and I would say that the EIT community is being built around this new legal entity as a highly integrated partnership. And this is essential because all the EIT innovation communities are seen as highly integrated partnerships. And really we have these high expectations to see EIT Food as this highly integrated partnership for improving nutrition and making the food system more resource efficient, secure, transparent, and trusted. But it's my duty and also my pleasure to say that you are not alone there. You are, I would say, in the family together with other innovation communities, starting, for example, with EIT Climate Kick that has been led as officer by Katerina the last 7 years, but also EIT Health that I mentioned that is, it will be very connected with EIT Food, but EIT Raw Materials, EIT InnoEnergy, EIT Digital, that we can see already from the presentation from Margaret, the connections and relevant synergies for making really the goal and the challenge that we are all here for. But very soon, Also, urban mobility and manufacturing innovation communities will be part of the family. This was already shared with a large stakeholders community last week in Brussels in our EIT Info Day. And let's say that it was a pleasure to have EIT Food there, represented by Torsten, but also with some other colleagues, already ready to share lessons learned, the success story, and the nice journey that you all experienced during 2007 startup phase. And it's important that I share that we are very much appreciating this, because at the end you are also inspiring the coming innovation communities to learn and to embed a lot of good things that you were already delivering this year. But also, let's say that being part of this EIT community as a whole brings solutions and growth and further opportunities for EIT Food itself. So it's the possibility to connect with a unique ecosystem and incredible community. So EIT Food, as I said, will be not only an example, but a driver of these connectivities that we all expect. If I stick for a second on this EIT community that we are updating right now, the vision, mainly because it's a very vibrant moment on what is happening not only in Brussels, but all around Europe, and what will happen next in the coming years. I would say that the EIT mission to contribute to the competitiveness of Europe, its sustainable economic growth and job creation stays as valid as day one, and even more reinforced thanks to the work that you are all providing. We do this by promoting and strengthening synergies and cooperation among businesses, education institutions, research organizations, and other profile of organization, creating favorable environments. This could be just soft words, but at the end has to be landed in ecosystems, in real areas where things are happening. And this is why, and this is a personal contribution on this based on lessons learned again, is not only the role of your organizations, it's also the role of all of us as individuals, because at the end is how the knowledge will be able to be connected and let's say, really providing impact. It's good to say that for those that are still not totally familiar, that the EIT is an EU body. So, and we are an integral part of Horizon 2020, not only for the bad things or the administrative things, but also for the good things. So we should all recognize the importance of being part of a wider strategy of the European Union. Almost all of our budget, and I think this is also important, goes to the 6 innovation communities. So we are also a lean management. I come from the European Commission. I have been in another executive agency for a while, so I can explain and see what this means in order to dedicate resources for you, for the implementers, to make things happen, and to feel part of the community and feel part of the team. That is something that we also experience in the headquarters. So a lot of effort has been put into building this EIT ecosystem. You are all aware about this. But what has been achieved with all this effort so far? So my short answer today, I don't want to extend too much, is a lot. Has been achieved a lot. And there is much more to get all together. And this is the part of the sun shining that Margaret was screening for us before. But let me say a couple of important elements, I think, for all of us. One is that in 2017, 2 separate studies showing that the EIT ecosystem is working and delivering results were published. So this is part of the interim assessment of Horizon 2020, and we should all be proud of this. It has been proved the value of the EIT model and how this is contributing to boosting innovation in Europe. But it's also true that we are the largest innovation community in Europe, with 40 innovation hubs, bringing together more than 1,000 partners. So, and probably this gives you a signal on how important is not only the work you are doing together in EIT Food, but how you could connect, or you are connecting already in a wider way. But this report that I mentioned came together with another report. It was about figures, about impact. It was an impact study from the Commission that says that the EIT community has supported already more than 800 ventures and created over 6,100 highly skilled jobs. Together with its leading partners, the EIT community also offers entrepreneurial education programs, as you know, EIT level degrees that we really want to see EIT Food very soon in these dynamics together with other KICs, masters and PhD levels, as well as executive and online education. So more than 1,200 students have been graduated, and we project to have 5,000 more by 2020. I think that we could spend some time setting figures, but as we have Torsten, Benoit in the room, also it's important to say that more than 600 million euros in external capital that the EIT community-supported startups and scale-up has been raised, so meaning that there is already a good signal, with more than 150 million euros only in 2016. So it means that something is happening out there. But let me stick with one final indicator, is that probably those that are a bit more connected with communication, external world have read already, but we are very proud to share that 32 innovators and entrepreneurs from the EIT community have been mentioned in the Forbes list of 30 under 30 in Europe. I'm pretty sure that EIT Food will contribute to these figures very, very soon. So we are very much excited about seeing this figure growing. But okay, the EIT model is there, is validated, but what's next? And probably my last words would be around what we should expect. We are in a very relevant moment, as I said before, so it's the moment to scale up. It's the moment really to feel this momentum and to work together to bring something even bigger for Europe. I will not mention the importance of the Regional Innovation Scheme. I think that Christophe in the room and Begoña and some others have been already positioning EIT Food from the day one to extend the work of this community in other areas and regions in Europe where it was still not the level of excellence that we all think that would be. So in a way, we have to have faith in the future, and the future is that we need to provide the stability to the EIT, to the stability of the strategic agenda that we have, and hopefully to have even a more ambitious agenda for the 2021-2027 timeline. In a nutshell is what we are working now. So we are working to revisit our main objectives and to see how these objectives can be made. On that, probably it's important to mention that as big picture is that to achieve this strategic agenda, we are forecasting a budget for 2021 to 2027 of 5.8 billion euros. This is the push that the EIT wants to achieve. And you may also have heard of the European Innovation Council and are wondering about overlaps and where the EIT and EIC will sit. On that, it's not new. I think it's outside there in the different discussions and negotiations, but I would say that the EIC and the EIT will be complementary and will deliver greater innovation impact from the next programming period for FP9, namely. And in practice, the EIT will foster innovation ecosystem, and is doing right now, while the EIC will focus on providing financing for disruptive innovation. So we want to see this happening and hopefully working all together. But you should feel, I think you feel important part of this already. You are helping to change the world, starting from your societal challenge. And we really think that from the EIT headquarters, we will be always present in order to be even more resilient and committed to this mandate. But access to all of this, access to this EIT community that I was mentioned, comes with a price. The price is expectations, and we are all creating expectations, and we have to manage these expectations correctly. I think that the first year of EIT Food, you already embed in your genetics that it's not possible just to copy-paste experiences from other innovation communities to yourself, but just to adapt to your ecosystem and to your own organization. So this is what we expect, that you, in a way, are able to transfer in a unique way towards your high integrated partnership. But you are also expected to do all that together with others and bring the best ideas to the market. You are also expected to add to the opportunities for funding, training, education, guidance, and access to networks. You are expected at the end of the day to innovate, and this is why sometimes we should all together overcome frustrations and especially with different programs and ideas. But on return, and this is just my final message today, in return, you are already and will be during the coming years an important part of the European largest innovation community, are certainly one of the largest in the world, and hopefully starting already, all of you, to see all the benefits and synergies with working not only in EIT Food, but together with other instruments at EU level. With no more than thanking all of you for your enthusiasm, your, let's say, dynamic attitude the last year, and wishing all the best for EIT Food in the EIT community in the years to come. Looking forward, of course, to keep this high cooperation from the EIT headquarters. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Manuel. So, now gives me a great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for the afternoon, my fellow countryman, Professor Chris Elliott, who's been a great supporter of EIT Food and the crucial role that has been played by colleagues from Queen's University Belfast, really from the earliest bid stages to where we are now. You know, I'm in no doubt about the real impact and drive and momentum the Queens have given us to get here. Chris is Faculty Pro Vice Chancellor for Medicine, Health and Life Sciences at Queen's, and his leadership extends to the Institute for Global Food Security, who are leading the way in addressing issues in this field also. Chris's own research record is second to none, and his development of a technology-driven approach to food fraud and detecting contamination is helping transform trust in the food chain. It's a privilege to have Professor Elliott join us to deliver this keynote. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, sir. So, thank you very much for the very kind introduction, Andrew. Just in case any of you are wondering already, it is English I'm speaking. But Andrew has offered to give simultaneous translation for anybody who needs it. We do have a different type of accent in terms of where we come from. So I was very pleased to be invited to give the lecture, because I thought what we should all do is think about the World Food Supply System in context. So any of you who are a scientist in the audience might think that's a chromatogram, but it's not. It's the rise of the world's population over history, and you can see it's exponentially growing. We're sitting about 7.5 billion at the moment, to rise to over 9.5 billion in a very short space of time. So to put that into context, we have to produce more food in the next 50 years than we did in the last 500. Now, you think about some of the challenges associated with that particular task. We know that our climate is changing, and changing dramatically. One of the things we do at my institute is we track crop failures, and it's happening everywhere in the world at an enormous rate. So what a challenge that is. And then we think about, we now live in an incredibly polluted planet. So mankind has done a fantastic job in polluting our environment. A huge amount of discussions over the last number of weeks and months about plastics in our ecosystems. And then, of course, we have another slight problem, is that currently about 1/3 of our planet is in water deficit, fresh water deficit. And by 2025, it's going to be 2/3 of our planet will be in water deficit. I hope I've cheered you all up now. And then, you know, there was some nice data given earlier on, and that was about trust, the loss of people's trust in our food supply system. So this is UK data, but I think we could look to just across Europe and think it's pretty much the same. About 58% of the population trust farmers, and when it gets down to those people involved in selling our food and those people who regulate our food supply system, the trust is incredibly low. So then we've got to think about why that low level of trust. And that's what I blame. It's the world food supply system. It's unbelievably complex. So what we eat, we don't know where it comes from. Often we don't know what we're eating. The supply system is full of vulnerabilities and complexities, and many, many things can go wrong. How can you start to explain to children where your food comes from when we operate in a system like that? In 1996, the United Nations at the World Food Summit came up with a definition of food security, and it stood us in very good stead for the last 20 plus years. But I personally think, and this is, I'm known to be maybe a little bit controversial at times, I think it's time to change the definition. I don't think we should think so much about food security, we should think about food integrity. So that isn't the United Nations definition, that's Chris Elliott's definition of food integrity. But I have now convinced the United Nations through Codex Alimentarius to come up with a definition, and we've got a working group on it now. I'm quite sure it will not be that definition, but I would think within the next 1 to 2 years we will really start to think about food integrity at a global level. So in terms of that definition, I have what I call the 6 principles of food integrity. And they're quite straightforward. The 6 principles. The food that we produce should be safe, it should be authentic, it should be nutritious, it should be produced in systems which are sustainable, it should be produced to the highest ethical standards, and then it's about respect. We've got to respect our environment, but also respect all of those people who work in the food industry. So what I'm going to do over the next 10 to 15 minutes is just to walk through these 6 principles. What each principle is, some of the big challenges, but also some of the ways that I believe that we as a community can really start to impact the integrity of the food that we consume in Europe. So in terms of food safety, I'm going to start off with some UK statistics. So often we hear our government telling us over and over again is we have the world's safest food supply system. Now, when I look at the data that's produced by the government, it tells us about 1 million people in the UK suffer from foodborne illness each year, and about 400 to 500 people die from foodborne illness. So you think, is that a particularly safe system? And I really have to apologise to our CEO, but I'm going to talk about the American food supply system, because also politicians in the US tell Americans we've got the world's safest food supply system.
Not true.
Well, it's not true, and thank you for that, because I wasn't quite sure what your reaction was going to be. But the Centre for Disease Control, which is a US agency, produced statistics and said that each year 48 million Americans get sick. That's 15% of the population, and somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 people die each year from foodborne illness. But then I look at what's happening outside of the developed world, and I start to try to collate the data from Africa, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, and it's incredibly difficult to extract that information. But I believe it's not hundreds or it's not thousands of people die from eating unsafe food. It's tens of millions of people each year. How can you have a food system based on integrity when we allow that to happen? So what can we do about this? And I think the first thing in terms of food is let's start to educate children, young children, about where food comes from, about what makes food safe, what makes food nutritious. Just start to educate kids again about food, because I think it's absent in so many different spheres. And then we do have the innovations that are coming along. Now, I have to say some of the innovations that I will talk about are some of the things that are going on within my institute at Queen's, but it's like the use of antimicrobial packaging. And I've talked to some people today about this, and they're getting really quite excited. But then there are some of those issues will be much more contentious. And that is, what about the use of low energy technologies in making food safer? Things like food irradiation. It's used in some parts of the world, but not used in Europe. And why? Because people don't trust irradiation. Now, we know, many of us will know, that the science is actually very sound to say you can make food safer using irradiation, but people don't trust. So what we just turn our back and say we don't use this technology because people are not being well enough informed. And if you think that's controversial, what about the role of biotechnology? What about the role of GM technologies? Because we know the science will say that we can make crops safer from things like mycotoxins, like the example that I've given there, but people do not believe GM is safe. So we have a huge amount of work to do in terms of communication in food safety. So in terms of the food that we eat is authentic. So we are just on about the 5-year anniversary of the European horse meat scandal. And that impacted 23 of the 26 member states. It was a huge scandal. And what I believe for the first time right across Europe, people started to understand the vulnerability of our food system. We don't know where our food is coming from. We don't know if it's safe, and we don't know if it's genuine. And I did quite a large piece of work for the UK government, and I invented the word food crime because it was criminals were penetrating our food supply system. So often people ask me now is, what will be the next scandal? And particularly when I'm talking to a food audience, people tend to get very, very worried about what I'm going to say next because they're thinking, oh God, I hope it's not what I work in. But it may be, because no foodstuff is safe from criminal activity. So I say from salt to saffron, the cheapest commodity to the most expensive, you're vulnerable to fraud. But if I was to be asked what I think one of the big vulnerabilities is, it's in organic production. It's growing, it's blossoming, you get more value to it. And again, I read an article in a US newspaper about 2 weeks ago, and it gave the US consumers 10 tips not to be cheated in buying organic food. Is that a system that people trust? Absolutely not. I also think there's a massive amount of fraud going on in nuts in different parts of the world, part of that fueled by crop failures in different parts of the world. And then, quite recently, I read an article in a Chinese journal to say that 70% of the fish being sold in one particular region of China wasn't what was written on the label, and that's not uncommon. What really surprised me was the fish that was being sold was actually a very toxic species. And you kind of think, well, that's okay, that's China, that's not here. But because of climate change, I can see a rise in the number of puffer fish now in the Mediterranean. If anybody knows about puffer fish, they carry tetrodotoxin, the world's most deadly toxin. Fishermen are catching it. Those will make their way into our food supply system because of fraud in the future, and people will die. I'm just full of good news, aren't I? But then think about the innovations, and some of the things that we are doing in my university and others are thinking about how can you fingerprint food? How can you look at the molecular makeup of food and measure it using cutting-edge technologies? And some of those technologies are actually linked to smartphone, little sensors that you can measure. And what you can start to do is to track food right across supply chains to make sure that it's genuine. Some of the other interventions are around track and trace technologies, and we're very much exploring the use of blockchain in tracking foodstuffs moving across the world. So there are a lot of innovations coming. So then in terms of the third principle was around nutritious food. A very, very simple mathematical sum. 1 + 2 + 2 = 5. So the 1 is the 1 million people on our planet, or 1 billion people on our planet at the minute who are malnourished. The 2 is the 2 billion people who are overnourished. And in the first time in the history of our planet, we now have more overnourished children than undernourished children. Isn't that incredible? And what's the last two? The last two are the 2 billion people who suffer from hidden hunger. Those of us who think we're getting the right diet, the right nutritional balance, well, we're not. We are missing so many key micronutrients from our diet. The fat-soluble vitamins, the trace metals, fatty acids. So in total, we have 5 billion of the 7.5 billion aren't getting the right nutrition. Is that a food system based on integrity? So some of the great innovations that are happening now is, I think for the first time in a long time, people are really starting to think about soil science. What should be in soils to drive the nutrition agenda? And I think that's something that EIT really has to become very involved in. And it's also about what the animals eat and driving the nutrition agenda for animals. Not to make them grow faster, not in terms of productivity, but in terms of nutritional content. And then back to education. We've really got to teach children about nutrition. Recently, we launched a project in Northern Ireland, and we are educating every primary school child in a whole city. The whole city, all the children are getting taught about nutrition. We call it Project DARE, and we think it's one of the most daring projects we have ever launched in terms of driving better nutrition right across the whole city. So in terms of the fourth principle then is about sustainability. And we know lots of the issues of sustainability. I talked about the shortage of water, yet you think about the amount of irrigation is used in our food supply system, which is diverting water away from the human population. We have all of the issues about the inputs that are going in to drive agriculture, the fertilizers and other sorts of chemicals. We are running short of them. How can we have a system based on sustainability when we carry on these practices? And also in terms of sustainability, if we do not protect our biodiversity, we will not have an agriculture and food system in the future. That's very, very clear. So we've got to think about biodiversity being a major part of sustainability. Again, back to what are the things that are changing, what are the innovations, and there is a huge amount of work now going on, really thinking about soil and going beyond soil, about the hydroponic systems that are happening in different parts of the world. Those will be part of innovations around sustainability. But it's also the use of, we call it smart agriculture or precision agriculture. So many good things are happening in different parts of the world that we really have to start to adopt these different types of technologies. But one of the big drivers will be money. The driver for all things. And in Europe at the moment, we're thinking about the common agricultural policy. It has to change. And if we can think about driving the common agricultural policy in the future to produce food which is safe, which is authentic, and which is nutritious, that will be how we can drive the sustainability agenda. So the fifth of my 6 principles is around ethical standards of food production. And when we talk about ethics of food, the first we can have a debate about whether it's ethical to eat animals or not. So I do eat animal-based protein. So I think about the 2 things I look for in raising animals. They have to be 2 things beginning with the letter H: healthy and happy. So we've got to think around that agenda of driving improvements in animal welfare in terms of having a very ethical food supply system. But also we've got to think about all of those inputs that we're putting into the land, the chemicals, particularly the pesticides, that are having a detrimental effect on human health, particularly around the endocrine system. Approximately 50% of the antibiotics that are produced in the world go into farm animal production. Yet one of our biggest issues in the world is antimicrobial resistance. So how can we be producing food based on antibiotics when that is having a massive and detrimental effect on the entire world's population. So there's lots of ethical issues there, and none of them are very, very simple or very easy. But then I start to think about one of the biggest issues we have in ethics is the drive by governments to keep the prices of food low. And it happens here in the UK, but I will tell you it happens across the world, because if the prices of food rise, the first thing that people do is get unhappy, and the second thing they do is they vote the government out. So there is an absolute demand by governments to keep prices of food low. And if you think low food does not equal good food, so there's ethical issues there in terms of how governments think about food pricing. Now, again, some of the innovations that are going on. So that seems to be a kind of a randomly colored diagram. So each of those clusters of dots is a metabolomic profile of chickens. And chickens produced to different standards: high welfare, low welfare, free range. So what we can actually do using science is tell how our food is being produced to ethical standards. There are the innovations. This is what I call cold plasma. So in my university, we're setting up Europe's first agriculture cold plasma centre, and that's about thinking about ways of treating animal disease without the need of antibiotics. There's all of this smart technology that's coming, sensors built into animals to look at their welfare, to look at how their movement patterns and how they're responding to different stimuli. And then we've got the innovations around drone technology, which absolutely amazes me. So this idea of thinking about using satellite images to find out what areas of crops look like they're struggling in terms of disease, and the drones come and pick out that little area of crop and spray. Really a huge amount of innovation in that space. So the last of my principles I talk about is respect, and that's respect for our environment and for all of those who work in the food industry. So I often use the world's palm oil industry in terms of our environmental issues. Now, the world's palm oil industry, the industry itself, claims to be 20% sustainable. To me, that's not something I would particularly brag about. Now, the world's palm oil industry employs many millions of people who would be in poverty if they weren't producing palm oil, so it's not just as straightforward. But I can guarantee you that we consume palm oil virtually every day of the week because it's in so many different food products. Yet we are destroying our forests across the world. So are we really respecting our environment by driving palm oil production? And then what about those people who work in the food supply? If you think about that complex food supply diagram, the lowest paid people are at the very beginning and at the very end. Those people who work on farms and those people who work in the food service industry, the lowest wages of anywhere in any economy. Are we really respecting them? So I have two maps. The one on your right is where most of the world's food is produced. The darker the colour, the more food is produced. The map on your left is where the majority of modern-day slavery happens in the world. They're identical. So what we're saying is we've got a world food supply system which is based on slavery. It's a bit of a shocking fact. And then it gets worse. What about these young children? So I've got one working in coconuts, one working in cocoa, and a group of children working in shrimps. Child labour supporting the world's food supply system. And I was meeting with a lot of my postgraduate students last week, and one of them said yeah, you're missing the point here, Chris, is because the vast majority of those people are women. And I didn't realise that. So we've got another issue there in terms of how we're thinking about equality right across the world. Now, a lot of these things we tend to think, do you know what, these are happening somewhere else. We shouldn't really worry about them. But there's a good friend of mine, his name's Professor Tim Benton. He was the global champion for food security in the United Kingdom. And what Tim set out to do was to map where the food was coming from, was being imported into the UK over a 12-month period. And the map he produced was that, the whole world. Our food comes from everywhere. So to think that our food supply system here in the UK, it does not rely on modern-day slavery and child labour is, I'm afraid, a myth. So what are we going to do about all of these issues in terms of respect? And I go right back to education. We have really started to educate young children about the complexities of food supply and why it's important to think about doing things differently. That's our responsibility. The work that we will do in EIT, we have got to communicate back to very young people to say, this is what you have to continue to do in the future. In terms of thinking about the issues of where food comes from, innovations and traceability are very, very important, the idea of blockchain and so forth. But when I start to think about innovations in reducing things like modern-day slavery, in reducing child labour, I'm struggling. I really am. What will be the big innovations that will change that mindset? So I think about, what about building a European food system based on one word, integrity? What about going from that to that? What about a food supply chain that a child could sit and draw and say, I know where my food comes from? Would that not be something wonderful to have in the future? So when I was putting this lecture together, I started to think about EIT food. What is it we're setting out to do here over the 7-year journey? And we have the 4 pillars. We have innovation, education, communication, and business creation. And if you think about those 4 pillars and my 6 principles, what a combination. If we think about each of those pillars, how it fits into the integrity agenda, wouldn't we be doing well? So I'm going to finish now with an advert. In May of this year, the last week, we're having, we call it the Belfast Summit on Global Food Integrity. We're going to discuss and debate those difficult issues around a food system based on integrity. And my final word is, if you Google Asset 2018, you'll find details, and I want to see you all there to join in the debate. So with that, I'll say thank you very much for your attention.
Cheers. Thank you, Chris, for that fascinating, sometimes horrifying overview of wider challenges in our industries. And clearly, if we think change through innovation is only about technology or profit, we all need to think again and think better. So thank you for that. And thinking about how we go about enacting change, helping change, fostering change, leads us on to our final speaker, Jane Brickman from the agri-food team at the Knowledge Transfer Network, Innovate UK's Knowledge Transfer Network. We've heard from Manuel about the innovation driven from EIT. Jane, coming from a background in biotechnology at the University of Manchester and experience in life sciences startups, and you've been at the heart of issues around innovation and collaboration for some time. And so, you know, I'm really interested to hear about your experience of, you know, being a leader in driving innovation and collaboration in areas relevant to our industries, and the particular challenges that the UK is facing in dealing with that. So I'll hand over to Jane. Thank you.
So I think everyone should feel sorry for me because I've had to finish the day and I've had to follow Chris, which hasn't been the easiest, I think. You know, so can I get my apologies in right at the very beginning? Okay, so the organisers asked me to just come and give you a little bit of a local flavour to the event to provide a local view. Obviously, the co-location centre is for Iceland, Ireland and the UK. I must admit, I know a reasonable amount about the food system in the UK, a little bit in Ireland, very little in Iceland, but I have done my homework, so hopefully we'll all learn a little bit more about Iceland to start with. But I think we've got Ireland on the first slide. How do I get this to move forward? So, as you can gather, I'm not very good with technology. So, okay, can I have the next slide then, please? Super. So, the organisers asked me to just give a little bit of an overview of the importance of the food industry to the economy of the countries within the UK, Ireland and Iceland. And basically, I think if we look over the next couple of slides, what we'll see reflects the point made earlier, which is that the food system is a substantial employer in all of these countries, and it's a large contributor to the economies, both domestic and export. And you can imagine that within the UK, working within business support, we're very, very interested in sort of coming up towards Brexit in terms of the how we're going to look at exports and how exactly that's all going to work. So if you think about Ireland, again, we're talking around 8% of total employment across Ireland, a substantial contributor to the economy of Ireland and a substantial exporter. And I think it's interesting if you look at the relationship of who is exporting. So Ireland have a very much European focus to their export economy, and they're well known for, obviously, for dairy, beef, prepared meals, and some very famous Irish beverages. It's thick and black and got a top on it. Okay, so on the next slide, please. So this is my attempt to understand a little bit about the Icelandic agri-food industry. And similarly, what you will see there is that, again, it's a fairly substantial net contributor to both employment and manufacturing output in Iceland. One of the things that's really quite interesting is when you're dealing with a country of that size is that I think there's about 330,000 people in Iceland in total. So you see large numbers of percentage, but actually when it comes down to it, it's sort of almost like a sort of slightly larger than a market town in terms of population size. But one of the things that's been really interesting in the work that I've done looking at that is that you've got the traditional industries such as the fisheries. You've got the adoption and the innovation that has come around of the adoption of the aquaculture industry. You've got there also they've taken what could be a negative sort of output in terms of their geography and their climate and said, okay, let's look at using renewable energy, using the geothermal energy of Iceland to try and get the benefit of protected crops such as tomatoes and other vegetables, using what is in effect a free output. I understand that also there's major problems in Iceland with the mining of cryptocurrencies. I have no idea what cryptocurrencies are, but I understand that it's basically taking up almost as much energy as the entire protected crop production. So can I then, next slide, please. So if you think about the food and drink industry, I've got predominantly figures here from food manufacturing. But the reason that I put these up is that they echo common themes around the exports, around domestic contributions, around workforce and skills, and give an indication of why the industry has such a strong driver and requirement for innovation. We need to have innovation actually hitting the marketplace. We need to make sure that in the time where we have population growth, that we do end up with a manufacturing space that is able to generate a safe and sustainable production. If you look at, for the UK, one of the things that the manufacturers are very keen on outlining is that food manufacturing is actually the UK's largest manufacturing industry. It's by no means necessarily the most well regarded, in the sense that people often wouldn't, if we were asked on the street, you know, what would you say is the largest manufacturing industry in the UK? I have a strong suspicion that many of those people on the street wouldn't understand that it is actually food manufacturing. They'd probably talk about aeronautics or talk about the car industry. And that is, again, something that by employing innovation and employing education, we can get people to understand that the production of food, where it comes from, and how you can ensure that you have a sustainable and safe food supply is so important. Next slide, please. One of the problems that you have when you're working with innovation within the food supply system, and this is true in the UK, and I'm sure it's true in the rest of Europe, is the actual complexion of your supply base. So we have around 6,500 SMEs in the UK, and they are, some of those are very, very innovative, but many, many are not. So often it's the UK food manufacturing in particular is looking for input into its innovation agenda from the large national businesses, both branded and private label, and that they innovation can often be driven by the supermarkets that encourage and support and request that innovation takes place in the smaller suppliers. Next slide, please. So how do the UK government try to actually support innovative businesses in the UK? Well, the support for academic science tends to run through the research councils in the UK, and obviously through European funding for certain aspects. And there's been quite a large number of industry engagement initiatives, such as the Diet and Health Research Club, where pre-competitive research is actually done alongside a group of industry members. And those industry members do two things. One, they try and help the academics to understand what it is at a strategic level the industry need from researchers in the pre-competitive space. And they also help them to understand how you can actually take those ideas that are generated within the university space and turn them into something that can be applicable within industry. The Innovate UK is the people who provide a lot of money for the Knowledge Transfer Network, and they basically are the part of the UK government that comes out the Department of Business, Enterprise and Industrial Strategy that support research directly for the industrial base. Sometimes this can be actually in collaboration with the academic components of the UK, or it can be in collaboration with other businesses. Our job at the Knowledge Transfer Network is to do two things. It's to encourage and support industry engagement with the research base, and to encourage the best applications that we can possibly get to the Innovate UK funding supply schemes. So we spend a lot of our time basically interacting with industry and trying to understand what their needs are. And the next slide will show a piece of work that we've just completed through one of the stakeholder groups that we call the Food Sector Group. And basically, this is for the food manufacturing organisations who come together 3 times a year And we basically use that as an opportunity to build relationships and to build working groups that look at what research can actually do for industry and how industry can help the government achieve its aims in policy terms. So this particular example is a piece of work that's come out in response to the UK's industrial strategy, and it's saying, look, this is what the food industry can do for the UK government in terms of delivering a sustainable food supply system that is flexible, that runs with the digital manufacturing components, that is going to perhaps help to solve some of the issues that we're going to face in terms of manpower, and to try and maintain and improve productivity, both individual productivity, but also obviously productivity for limited resources and in terms of sustainability of the system going forwards. There's a website there that you can have a look at if you want to see this particular piece of work. And this is, as I say, is done in response to the industrial strategy. But if you look at those points that are there, you will see an awful lot of common ground with documents that are coming out of EIT. So the food sector group that has produced this piece of work is also acts as the de facto national technology platform for the ETP Food for Life, and we report into them. And I just wanted to sort of let you know that within that way, we appreciate the opportunity to link in to the European-wide sector and to reflect those research aims more broadly across the UK. I was interested with Chris's point about soil science. Now, an RTO that you're probably aware, Camden BRI in the UK, runs every 3 years runs a business needs survey, and they, for the first time in the 2018 survey, soil science came up as a major requirement and something that is keeping the people within the agri-food chain sleepless at night. So today, the government actually announced a £90 million additional funding for agri-tech, predominantly in the agri-tech sector rather than in the food manufacturing space. And that is for work across the pre-competitive and industrial research space, both within the UK and in part overseas as well. I also wanted to remark that today the National Farmers Union of England and Wales, for the first time in their history, elected the first female president of that organisation, a beef farmer from the west of England. So we were talking earlier about women in science and the agri-food system. If you want to go to the next slide, please. So our job is to work with organisations such as the KIC and to help businesses. One of the tools that we use, is just given an example here, is that we try and help people get to know and understand who does what within the UK landscape. And obviously, next slide, please. If having seen somebody that you want to actually talk to within the UK, if you then want to actually give any of us a call or drop us an email, we're there to help put industry and the research base into contact with one another. Thank you for your attention.
Big thank you to Jane there. I think across all of our speakers today, we've heard today why the mission of EIT Food matters, both for quality of life and economically, both within this CLC region and internationally. And hopefully we also have a flavour now of the innovation ecosystems in which we fit. And I think the challenge, certainly as I see it in this region, is really to mobilise our potential for collaboration based on the strengths and the framework that EIT provides, but in a way which makes sense within the industrial strategies, the local priorities of the countries within our region. And I think if we can manage to get that synergy happening, we'll have come a long way, I think, in beginning to answer some of these questions. So again, a very, very heartfelt and huge thank you to all of our speakers for this evening. And I'd also like to thank you, the partners and guests, for helping us launch and for your participation in this important endeavour. And hopefully, moving on from today, there's been a huge amount of collaboration happening this afternoon in meetings and people getting together and sharing ideas. And we're only at the end of day one, so expect to see some great things coming out on our next funding call and in future years' projects. I'll shortly ask you to join us for drinks outside in the mezzanine level to help us celebrate. That's my excuse anyway. But just a little bit of housekeeping. Dinner will be served back in this room at 7 p.m. And we will have a talk during the dinner from Richard Allison, who's a performance nutritionist at Arsenal Football Club. So in keeping with the venue in which we find ourselves. So I've just remembered while I was sitting there that Reading's nickname used to be the Biscuit Men, a reference back to the days of Huntley and Palmer's and the biscuits which kind of fed the empire. I'm sure we'll hear from Richard that nutrition has moved on somewhat further than people munching on sugary snacks before a game. I'm sure we'll have a fascinating insight into the culture and practices around nutrition for elite athletes. So as I ask you to join us outside, I would also ask you to please take all of your belongings with you so that the staff can turn the room around and get it ready for us to come back in again. And thank you again, everyone, for your time. And I look forward to continuing the celebration outside. Thank you.